When wealthy heiress Camille Sterling hired what she thought was a cheap local contractor to save her crumbling estate, she had no idea she was about to come face to face with the man whose heart she had shattered 10 years ago. Julian Vance wasn't just any contractor. He was now a tech millionaire, worth more than her entire family fortune, and he had returned with the secret that would expose the lies her mother had built their empire on. What Camille thought was a cruel breakup letter she had sent was actually a forgery, and the boy she believed had abandoned her had spent a decade building an empire just to prove he was worthy of her love. But when Eleanor Sterling discovers her daughter's forbidden feelings are rekindling, she unleashes a calculated attack that threatens to destroy Julian's reputation and send Camille spiraling into a choice between love and legacy. The question isn't whether Julian can forgive Camille for the past, it's whether she's brave enough to sacrifice everything she's ever known for the man she never stopped loving. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're from, because this story of redemption, revenge, and second chances is about to get intense. Camille Sterling stood on the stone balcony of her family's estate, watching the morning mist roll across the neglected gardens. The once proud Sterling manor looked tired. Paint peeled from window frames, weeds pushed through cracks in the walkways. The fountain in the center courtyard had been dry for months. She pulled her silk robe tighter against the cool October air. At 27, Camille had been managing the estate for 3 years, ever since her father passed. But managing and maintaining were two different things. The Sterling family fortune wasn't what it used to be. "Camille," her mother's sharp voice cut through the quiet morning. "Come inside, we need to talk." Camille sighed and turned away from the view. Eleanor Sterling waited in the breakfast room, already dressed in her pearls and pressed blazer. At 60, she still carried herself like the society queen she'd always been. But worry lines had appeared around her eyes lately. "Sit down, dear." Eleanor poured coffee from the silver service. "I've been reviewing the repair estimates." Camille settled into her chair. "And?" "They're outrageous. 50,000 for the roof alone, another 30 for the foundation work." Eleanor's mouth formed a thin line. "We can't afford these prices." "Mother, the house is falling apart. We have to do something." "Yes, but we don't have to throw money away." Eleanor pulled out a Yellow Pages ad she'd torn from the phone book. "Look, local contractors, half the price." Camille studied the small ad. The company name was handwritten in marker. No website listed, just a phone number. "This looks unprofessional." "Professional costs money we don't have." Eleanor's tone grew sharp. "These local laborers will do just fine. They should be grateful for the work." Something uncomfortable twisted in Camille's stomach. She'd heard her mother talk about those people before. The workers. The townspeople who lived beyond their gated community. Eleanor always spoke about them like they were a different species. "I don't know, Mother. Maybe we should—" "Camille." Eleanor's voice carried warning. "Your father worked too hard to build our reputation. We're not going to lose everything because you got soft-hearted about money." The words stung. Camille had heard variations of this lecture her whole life. Be strong. Be better. Remember who you are. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment. "Fine." Camille reached for her phone. "I'll call them." Eleanor smiled with satisfaction. "Good girl. And remember, these people need to know their place. Be firm. Don't let them take advantage." Camille dialed the number from the ad. A woman answered on the third ring. "Vance Global Landscaping and Design. How can I help you?" Camille blinked. The company name sounded much more professional than the ad looked. "Yes, I'm calling about repair work for an estate." "Certainly. Can you tell me about the scope of the project?" Camille described the house's problems: roof damage, foundation issues, overgrown gardens. The woman on the phone listened carefully, asking detailed questions. "This sounds like a significant project," the woman said finally. "Our minimum consultation fee is $5,000. Camille nearly dropped the phone. $5,000? Just to look? "Our team includes licensed structural engineers and master craftsmen. We don't work on small projects." "Wait," Camille said quickly. The woman was about to hang up. "This is Sterling Manor, On Hillcrest Drive. A pause. Sterling Manor, the historic property? Yes. Another pause. Let me speak with my supervisor. Can I call you back? 20 minutes later, Camille's phone rang. Miss Sterling, this is the same woman from before. We've had a cancellation today. Our lead contractor could visit this afternoon if you're available. Today? Camille looked at her watch. It was barely 10 in the morning. Would 2 o'clock work? Camille agreed and hung up. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. They're coming today, this afternoon. Good. Remember what I said. Firm but fair. Don't let them see any weakness. Camille nodded, but the uncomfortable feeling in her stomach grew stronger. By 2 o'clock, Camille had changed into her most intimidating outfit: black tailored pants, white silk blouse, hair pulled back in a severe bun. She practiced her estate manager face in the mirror, cool, professional, in control. She waited in the front parlor, watching the driveway through tall windows. At exactly 2 o'clock, a vehicle pulled through the front gate. Camille's breath caught. The car was a sleek black SUV that probably cost more than most people's houses. This wasn't what she'd expected from a local contracting company. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Camille's world tilted. Even from a distance, she recognized the broad shoulders, the confident way he moved, the way he looked up at the house like he was seeing through its problems to its potential. Julian Vance, the boy her mother had forced her to break up with 10 years ago, the boy Eleanor had called totally inappropriate and not our kind of people. Except he wasn't a boy anymore. He'd grown into his height, his shoulders had filled out, he wore an expensive-looking suit that fit him perfectly. But his face was the same. Strong jaw, dark eyes that seemed to see everything, the same face that used to smile at her like she was the only person in the world. Camille gripped the window curtain. This couldn't be happening. Julian was supposed to be. Where? She'd never let herself think about it. But not here. Not successful. Not standing in her driveway looking like he belonged in her world. Julian pulled a tablet from the SUV and started toward the front door. Camille backed away from the window. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The doorbell rang. Camille forced herself to walk slowly to the front door. She took 3 deep breaths and opened it. Miss Sterling? Julian's voice was deeper now, more confident. I'm Julian Vance from Vance Global. We spoke about the consultation. His dark eyes met hers. For just a second, she saw a flicker of, what? Recognition? Pain? Then his expression went completely professional. Yes, Camille's voice came out steadier than she felt. Please come in. Julian stepped into the foyer. He seemed to fill the space, even though the ceiling was 15 feet high. He looked around, taking in the crystal chandelier, the marble floors, the oil paintings of stern-faced Sterling ancestors. Beautiful home, he said politely. How long has your family lived here? 4 generations. Camille fell back on the script she'd given to tour groups. Built in 1892 by my great-great-grandfather. Julian made a note on his tablet. And when did you first notice the structural problems? They walked through the house. Julian examined everything with the eye of someone who knew what he was looking at. He took photos, made measurements, asked technical questions that Camille couldn't answer. The roof damage is extensive, he said, running his hand along a water stain on the dining room ceiling. But the real problem is in the foundation. You've got water damage that goes back years. How bad is it? Julian looked at her directly for the first time since he'd arrived. Expensive. They moved outside to look at the gardens. This was worse. What used to be carefully designed flower beds were now tangles of weeds. Stone paths were cracked and uneven. The old fountain was filled with dead leaves. This could be beautiful again, Julian said quietly. He knelt beside a rose bush that was still trying to bloom despite the neglect. These are good bones. Something in his voice made Camille's chest tight. This was the Julian she remembered. The boy who could see potential where others saw problems. Who could make dead things grow. The total project would run about $200,000, Julian said, standing and brushing dirt from his hands. That's for everything. Structural repairs, roof, foundation, landscaping. Camille's stomach dropped. 200,000. Quality work costs money, Miss Sterling, but this house is worth saving. Julian looked up at the manor's facade. Some things are too important to trust to the lowest bidder. Before Camille could respond, Eleanor's voice rang out from the front steps. Camille, who is this person? Eleanor Sterling swept down the front steps like a queen approaching her subjects. She wore her most intimidating smile, the one that made service people stammer and contractors lower their prices. Then she saw Julian's face. Eleanor stopped dead. Her polite mask slipped for just a moment, revealing pure shock. You, she whispered, Mrs. Sterling. Julian's voice went completely flat. It's been a long time. Eleanor recovered quickly, but Camille saw the calculation in her mother's eyes. She was trying to figure out how to handle this situation. I'm afraid there's been some mistake, Eleanor said smoothly. We were expecting a local contractor. I am local. Julian's smile had no warmth in it. Grew up right here in town, though I suppose that was never good enough for you. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Camille looked between her mother and Julian, trying to understand what was happening beneath the surface of their polite conversation. Well, Eleanor said after a long pause, I'm sure you'll understand that we need to consider all our options. Thank you for your time. She turned toward the house, clearly expecting Julian to leave. Actually, Julian said, his voice still professionally calm, Miss Sterling and I have a contract. Eleanor spun around. What? Julian pulled out his tablet and showed them a document. Your daughter signed our consultation agreement this morning. It includes a 60-day exclusive period for project planning. Camille stared at the screen. She had signed something when Julian arrived, but she'd been so rattled by seeing him that she hadn't read it carefully. That's impossible, Eleanor snapped. Camille wouldn't. The contract is perfectly legal, Julian said, and non-negotiable. We'll begin work on Monday. Eleanor's face went pale with anger. Now you listen here. Mother, Camille surprised herself by speaking up. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Julian nodded. I'll be in touch about the work schedule. He looked directly at Camille. I think this project is going to be very educational. He walked back to his SUV without another word. Camille and Eleanor stood in silence until the car disappeared through the front gate. Do you have any idea what you've done? Eleanor hissed. Camille stared at the spot where Julian's car had been. I think I'm about to find out. That evening, Camille sat across from Sutton Blackwell at the country club dining room. Sutton had been trying to date her for 2 years. He was the kind of man her mother approved of. Old money, right family, appropriate connections. You look distracted tonight, Sutton said, cutting his steak with precise movements. Everything all right? Just estate business. Camille picked at her salmon. She couldn't stop thinking about the way Julian had looked at her. Professional, distant, like she was a stranger. I heard you hired some local crew for the repairs. Sutton's voice carried disapproval. Seems risky. These people don't understand quality. These people? You know what I mean. The locals. Workers. They're fine for basic labor, but restoration work requires a certain caliber of craftsmen. Camille set down her fork. The words sounded exactly like something her mother would say, something she would have agreed with yesterday morning. What if they're qualified? She heard herself ask. Sutton laughed. Camille, be practical. What would someone from around here know about historic preservation? They probably learned everything they know from YouTube. The dismissive tone in his voice made Camille's skin crawl. It was the same tone Eleanor used when she talked about those people. Maybe I should give them a chance, Camille said quietly. Give them a chance? Sutton reached across the table and patted her hand like she was a confused child. Darling, your soft heart is charming, but this is business. You can't let emotions cloud your judgment. There were those words again. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment. Camille excused herself early, claiming a headache. She drove home through the quiet streets, thinking about Julian's expression when he said, Some things were too important to trust to the lowest bidder. When she reached the manor, she parked in the circular drive and sat looking up at the house. The windows were dark except for one light in her mother's bedroom. The old place looked lonely, tired, like it had been waiting for someone to care about it properly. Camille got out of the car and walked around to the back garden. Moonlight made everything silver and mysterious. She could almost see what the space used to be, what it could be again with the right touch. A light caught her eye. Someone was working in the far corner of the garden, near the old tool shed. Camille walked closer and saw Julian kneeling beside a section of stone wall. He had a flashlight clamped to his shoulder and was carefully removing stones, examining each one. "It's kind of late to be working," she called out. Julian looked up, shading his eyes against his flashlight. "Foundation problems don't keep normal hours." Camille came closer. "What are you doing?" "Checking the integrity of these retaining walls. This one's been holding back water damage for months." Julian set a stone aside and reached for another. "If it fails, you'll lose the whole back garden." "In the dark?" Julian's hands paused. "I couldn't sleep." The honesty in his voice caught Camille off guard. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sounds coming from night insects and distant traffic. "Julian," Camille's voice came out softer than she meant it to. "About what happened 10 years ago." "Don't." Julian's voice went hard. "We're not doing this." "But I need to explain." "No, you don't." Julian stood up, brushing dirt from his knees. "You made yourself very clear in that letter." Camille stared at him. "Letter? What letter?" Julian's expression shifted slightly. "The letter you sent, breaking things off. Telling me I was, what were the words? Not suitable for someone of your position." "I never sent you a letter." "Right." Julian's voice was flat with disbelief. "You just disappeared, no goodbye, no explanation. And then that letter showed up a week later." "Julian, I swear to you, I never wrote any letter." Camille's mind was racing. "My mother told me you left town. She said you decided I was too much trouble." They stared at each other in the moonlight. Camille saw doubt creep into Julian's expression. "Your mother," he said slowly. "What did the letter say, exactly?" Julian was quiet for so long that Camille thought he wouldn't answer. "It said you'd been thinking about our relationship, that your family had made you realize I wasn't the kind of person you should be with, that you needed to be with someone who could match your social position." Julian's voice got quieter. "It said you'd enjoyed our time together, but it was time to be realistic about who we were." Each word hit Camille like a physical blow. The letter sounded exactly like something Eleanor would write, cold, calculating, designed to hurt. "I never sent that," Camille whispered. "Then why didn't you call? Why didn't you look for me?" The question hung between them. Camille remembered that terrible week 10 years ago. How she'd waited for Julian to call. How she'd driven past his house, but his car was never there. How her mother had gently suggested that maybe Julian had gotten what he wanted and moved on. "She told me you left," Camille said. "She said you'd found someone else." Julian stared at her for a long moment. "I left because of the letter." The pieces clicked together in Camille's mind. Her mother's satisfaction when Julian disappeared. The way Eleanor had steered her toward appropriate boys like Sutton. The way she'd always changed the subject when Camille asked about Julian. "Oh God," Camille breathed. "She lied to both of us." Thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm they'd been expecting all day was finally rolling in. "I should go," Julian said. He started gathering his tools. "Julian, wait, please. We need to talk about this." "No, we don't." But his voice lacked conviction. "It was 10 years ago, Camille. Ancient history." "Is it?" Camille stepped closer. "Because it doesn't feel ancient to me." Julian stopped moving. In the flashlight's glow, Camille could see the conflict in his expression. Part of him wanted to walk away. but part of him wanted answers as much as she did. The first drops of rain started to fall. "This doesn't change anything," Julian said quietly. "Doesn't it?" The rain was coming faster now. Julian looked up at the sky, then at Camille. "We should get inside." They ran for the house as the storm broke open above them. By the time they reached the back door, they were both soaked. Camille fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. Inside the mudroom, they stood dripping on the tile floor. Julian's white shirt was transparent now, clinging to his shoulders. Water dripped from his hair onto his collar. "I should go," he said again, but he didn't move. "The storm's getting worse." Camille could hear the wind picking up outside. "You should wait it out." Julian looked like he was fighting with himself. "Camille, I know this is complicated, but we're going to be working together for the next 2 months. Maybe we should clear the air." Julian ran a hand through his wet hair. "Clear the air, right." "I'm serious. We're both adults. We can handle this professionally." "Professionally?" Julian's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Is that what this is?" The question sent heat racing through Camille's chest. She was suddenly very aware that they were alone in the quiet house, that her mother was asleep upstairs, that Julian was looking at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "I don't know what this is," she admitted. Lightning flashed outside, followed immediately by thunder. Julian moved closer to the window, checking the storm's intensity. "I really should go." "At least let me get you a towel." Camille disappeared into the laundry room and returned with a stack of clean towels. Julian accepted one gratefully and dried his face and hair. "Thank you." "Julian," Camille's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for whatever my mother did, for the way things ended, for all of it." Julian looked at her for a long moment. "I know." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something. A crack in the wall he'd built between them. "The work starts Monday?" Camille asked. "Bright and early, 7 a.m. "I'll be ready." Julian headed for the door, then paused. "Camille, the letter, it really hurt." "I know, and if I could take it back." "But you can't." Julian's voice was gentle but firm. "Some things you can't take back." He left through the kitchen door, jogging through the rain to his SUV. Camille watched until his taillights disappeared down the driveway. Then she stood in her empty kitchen, listening to the storm and thinking about letters she'd never written and lies her mother had told. 10 years ago, she'd lost Julian because she'd been too young and too scared to fight for him. But she wasn't that girl anymore. And, this time, she had a chance to get it right. Monday morning arrived, gray and cold. Camille woke before dawn, her stomach tight with nerves. She'd spent the weekend thinking about her conversation with Julian, about the letter her mother had apparently forged, about 10 years of believing lies. She dressed carefully in jeans and a sweater, work clothes, but nice ones. She wanted to look approachable, but not like she was trying too hard. At exactly 7 o'clock, a convoy of trucks rolled through the front gate. Julian's black SUV led the way, followed by 3 work trucks loaded with equipment. Camille watched from the kitchen window as men in hard hats and safety vests began unloading tools. Julian stepped out of his vehicle, wearing work boots, dark jeans, and a navy blue shirt with Vance Global embroidered on the chest. He moved with quiet authority, directing his crew with quick gestures and brief instructions. Camille poured 2 cups of coffee and walked outside. "Morning," she said, called out. Julian looked up from his clipboard. "Miss Sterling?" The formal address stung. After Saturday night's conversation, she'd hoped they might drop the pretense. But Julian's expression was completely professional. "I brought coffee." She held out one of the mugs. "Thank you." Julian accepted the coffee but didn't drink it. "We'll be starting with the foundation work. There'll be some noise." "That's fine. I'll stay out of your way." "Appreciated." His politeness felt like a wall between them. Camille watched as Julian introduced her to his crew. There were 5 men total. Marcus, the project manager, looked to be about Julian's age. He had an easy smile and treated Julian with obvious respect and friendship. "Miss Sterling," Marcus said, shaking her hand. "Julian's told us a lot about this property. We're excited to work on it." I hope you can bring it back to life.
Oh, we will, Marcus said confidently. Julian doesn't take on projects he can't handle.
The other crew members were younger. Leo was barely out of high school, eager and quick to learn. The others were experienced craftsmen who clearly knew their business. As the morning progressed, Camille found herself fascinated by the work. She'd expected chaos and noise, but Julian's crew moved with precision. They'd clearly worked together before. Julian himself was everywhere at once, checking measurements, consulting blueprints, getting his hands dirty alongside his workers. Camille remembered the boy who used to help her in her mother's garden. He'd had the same careful attention to detail then. Around 10 o'clock, Eleanor made her first appearance. "Good morning, Camille." Eleanor's voice carried across the garden like a cold wind. "How are our workers doing?" She said the word workers like it left a bad taste in her mouth. "Very well, Mother. They seem to know what they're doing." Eleanor surveyed the scene with obvious disapproval. "There are so many of them. Do we really need 5 men digging around our property? It's a big job." Eleanor's gaze landed on Julian, who was examining the foundation of the old tool shed. "And what about him, the one in charge?" "What about him?" "Camille, darling, you're being naive. These people see a house like ours and think opportunity. We need to watch them carefully." The casual prejudice in her mother's voice made Camille's stomach turn. She'd heard Eleanor talk this way hundreds of times before, but now the words felt personal. Eleanor was talking about Julian like he was a threat instead of a solution. "He's a professional contractor, Mother, not a criminal." "Professional." Eleanor's laugh was sharp. "Anyone can put on nice clothes and call themselves professional. What matters is breeding, character, the values someone was raised with." Camille watched Julian work. He moved with quiet confidence, treating his crew with respect and his work with pride. Everything about him suggested success and competence. "Maybe we shouldn't judge people based on where they come from," Camille said quietly. Eleanor turned to stare at her daughter. "Excuse me?" "I said maybe we shouldn't assume things about people." "Camille Sterling, what has gotten into you? Your father worked his whole life to give us this position, this respect. We don't throw that away for some misguided sense of equality." The words hit Camille like a slap. She'd heard variations of this speech her entire life. About position, about respect, about not forgetting who she was. But what if who she was wasn't good enough? Around noon, the weather turned nasty. Heavy clouds rolled in, bringing cold rain and gusting wind. Julian called his crew together near their trucks. "Let's break for lunch," Camille heard him say. "This weather's too dangerous for foundation work." The men started packing up their tools. Camille noticed Leo, the young worker, struggling with a heavy wheelbarrow. One of the retaining walls had developed a crack from the morning's digging, and loose stones were scattered around the work area. "Careful with those rocks," Marcus called out. "That whole section's unstable." Leo nodded and kept working. He was trying to move too quickly, eager to prove himself. Camille saw him wrestling with a stone that was clearly too heavy for one person. "Leo, wait for help," Julian shouted over the wind. But the warning came too late. Leo shifted his weight wrong, and the stone slipped from his grip. It crashed into the base of the wall, sending a shower of loose rocks tumbling down. Leo jumped back, but not fast enough. The falling stones caught his leg, and he went down hard. "Leo!" Marcus started running toward the accident, but Julian was already moving. He vaulted over a pile of equipment and reached Leo first. The boy was trapped under several large stones, his face pale with pain and shock. "Don't move," Julian commanded. He dropped to his knees next to Leo, assessing the damage. "Marcus, call 911, now." "I'm okay," Leo gasped. "I can get up." "You're not getting up until we know what we're dealing with." Julian's voice was calm but firm. "Where does it hurt?" "My leg and my back. God, it hurts." The rocks pinning Leo's leg were too heavy for one person to move safely. Julian looked around quickly, calculating angles and leverage points. "Okay, listen to me," he told his crew. "We're going to lift these stones together, on my count, slow and steady." But the largest stone was shifting. The whole pile was unstable, threatening to collapse further. Julian could see that trying to lift the rocks might make things worse. Without hesitation, Julian crawled under the shifting stones. If the pile collapsed now, he'd be trapped too. "Boss, don't!" Marcus shouted. "It's too dangerous." Julian ignored him. He wedged his shoulder under the largest stone and braced his legs against the ground. "On 3, pull Leo clear." Camille watched in horror from the garden. Julian was risking his life for a boy he'd known for a few months. The stones above him creaked ominously. 1, Julian grunted, taking the weight. 2, 3. Marcus and the other workers grabbed Leo under his arms and pulled him free just as the stone pile shifted again. Julian rolled away barely in time as several more rocks crashed down where Leo had been lying. The paramedics arrived 15 minutes later. Leo's leg was badly bruised but not broken. His back was strained but not seriously injured. He'd be sore for weeks, but he'd be fine. Julian rode with Leo to the hospital, leaving Marcus in charge of the cleanup. The crew worked in subdued silence, packing equipment and securing the work area. Eleanor appeared at Camille's elbow as the ambulance drove away. "Well," she said with satisfaction, "that didn't take long." "What do you mean?" "Someone got hurt. These people don't follow proper safety procedures. Now we'll probably be sued." Camille stared at her mother in disbelief. "A boy was injured, Mother. Julian saved him from being seriously hurt." "Julian put him in danger in the first place. Poor supervision. Inadequate planning." Eleanor shook her head. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." "You saw what happened. Julian risked his own life to help that boy." "Julian should have prevented the accident entirely. That's what we're paying him for." Camille felt something break loose inside her chest, a lifetime of her mother's cold judgments, her quick assumptions, her complete inability to see anything good in people she considered beneath her. "You're wrong," Camille said quietly. "I beg your pardon?" "You're wrong about him, about all of them." Eleanor's eyes flashed with anger. "Camille, you're being emotional. This is exactly what I mean about not letting sentiment cloud your judgment." But Camille wasn't listening anymore. She was thinking about the way Julian had moved, without thinking, without calculating the cost. He'd seen someone in trouble and acted. How many men like Sutton would have done the same thing? That evening, Camille drove to the hospital. She told herself she was just checking on Leo, making sure he was okay. It had nothing to do with Julian. She found them in the emergency room waiting area. Leo was stretched out on a gurney, his leg wrapped in ice packs. Julian sat beside him, still wearing his work clothes. "Hey," Julian said, looking up as Camille approached. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to check on Leo, make sure he was all right." "I'm fine," Leo said, though his face was still pale. "Just banged up. Julian probably saved my life." "I didn't save anything," Julian said gruffly. "I should have seen that wall was unstable." "Boss, nobody could have predicted that. Sometimes accidents just happen." Julian didn't look convinced. Camille recognized the expression on his face. He was blaming himself for something that wasn't his fault. "The doctor says he can go home tonight," Julian told Camille. "Couple weeks of rest, and he'll be good as new." "What about you? Are you hurt?" Julian flexed his shoulder, wincing slightly. "Just bruised. I'll live." A nurse appeared with Leo's discharge papers. Julian helped the boy into a wheelchair while Leo's girlfriend arrived to drive him home. "Take tomorrow off," Julian told Leo. "Come back when you feel better." "I'll be back Wednesday," Leo promised. "Thanks, boss, for everything." After Leo left, Julian and Camille found themselves alone in the waiting room. Julian looked exhausted. His clothes were dirty and torn from crawling under the rocks. There was a scrape on his cheek that he probably didn't even know was there. "You should get that looked at," Camille said, pointing to the scrape. Julian touched his face absently. It's nothing. Julian, Camille's voice was soft. What you did today was brave. It was stupid. I could have made things worse. But you didn't. You saved him. Julian stood up, suddenly restless. I should go. Early day tomorrow. Let me drive you. You look tired. My truck's here. Then let me buy you dinner. You haven't eaten anything since this morning. Julian hesitated. Camille could see him fighting with himself again. Part of him wanted to say yes. Part of him wanted to keep his distance. Camille. Just dinner, between colleagues. That almost smile flickered across Julian's face. Colleagues? Professional associates? Now you're just making up terms. Is that a yes? Julian sighed. There's a diner about 10 minutes from here, nothing fancy. Perfect. The diner was exactly what Camille expected. Red vinyl booths, checkered floor, coffee that could strip paint. Julian ordered a burger and fries. Camille got soup and a sandwich. This place doesn't exactly match your usual dining standards, Julian said, looking around the modest restaurant. What makes you think you know my usual dining standards? Lucky guess. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Camille watched Julian relax as his hunger was satisfied. The lines of tension around his eyes gradually smoothed out. Can I ask you something? Camille said finally. Why did you come back here? You could work anywhere. Julian considered the question. This is home. That's it? People here gave me a chance when I was starting out. Mrs. Rodriguez hired me to do her landscaping when I was 16. Mr. Patterson taught me carpentry. Coach Williams wrote my college recommendation letters. Julian shrugged. I owe this place. But after what happened with us, wasn't it hard to come back? Julian's expression grew careful. That was a long time ago. Not that long. Long enough. Camille leaned forward. Julian, about that letter, I need you to know. Camille, stop. Julian's voice was gentle but firm. It doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me. Why? We're different people now. We've both moved on. Have we? The question hung between them. Julian looked at her for a long moment, and Camille saw something flicker in his dark eyes. Something that looked like hope and fear mixed together. This is complicated, he said finally. I know. Your mother's not going to approve. Since when do I care what my mother approves of? Julian's eyebrows rose. Since always, from what I remember. Camille felt heat rise in her cheeks. He wasn't wrong. She'd spent her whole life trying to live up to Eleanor's expectations, following her mother's rules about who was acceptable and who wasn't. Maybe it's time I stopped caring, she said quietly. Julian studied her face like he was trying to read something written there. You've changed. Have I? The Camille I knew never would have said that. The Camille you knew was 18 and scared of disappointing her mother. And now? Camille thought about the question, about watching Julian risk his life for Leo, about the casual cruelty in Sutton's voice when he talked about those people, about her mother's cold satisfaction when the accident happened. Now I'm 27 and scared of disappointing myself. Julian was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than it had been all day. That's a good answer. They finished their meal in silence, but it was a different kind of quiet now, less tense, more thoughtful. Outside the diner, they stood beside their cars in the parking lot. The rain had stopped, but the air was cold and damp. Thank you, Julian said. For dinner, for coming to the hospital. Thank you for saving Leo. Just doing my job. No, Camille said firmly. What you did today went way beyond your job. Julian looked like he wanted to argue, then changed his mind. I should go. Julian? Camille's voice stopped him as he reached for his truck door.
For what it's worth, I never stopped thinking about you, even when I thought you'd left me for someone else. Julian went very still. Camille? I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. She got in her car and drove away before he could respond. But in her rearview mirror, she saw him standing in the parking lot for a long time, watching her taillights disappear into the night. When Camille got home, Eleanor was waiting in the front parlor. Where have you been? Her mother demanded. I called your cell phone 3 times. At the hospital, checking on the worker who was injured. The hospital? Camille, that's completely inappropriate. We're not responsible for their medical care. A man was hurt on our property, Mother. It was the decent thing to do. Eleanor's expression grew sharp. Decent? Camille, you're being manipulated. This is exactly how these people operate. They stage an accident, play on your sympathy, then demand compensation. Stage an accident? Mother, I saw what happened. Those stones could have killed him. Convenient, don't you think? Right where we could see it, right where you'd feel sorry for them. Camille stared at her mother in disbelief. You think they planned this? I think that Julian person is very clever. He knows exactly which buttons to push with you. What's that supposed to mean? Eleanor smiled coldly. I'm not blind, Camille. I see the way you look at him, the way you used to look at him. The words hit Camille like ice water. This has nothing to do with the past. Doesn't it? He shows up here after 10 years and suddenly you're questioning everything about our family? About our values? About the way we live? Eleanor's voice rose. He's using your history against you. Maybe our values need questioning. Eleanor went completely still. What did you say? Maybe the way we live isn't as perfect as we think it is. Camille Sterling, you listen to me. Your father died protecting this family's reputation, our position in this community, our legacy. Eleanor's voice shook with anger. I will not let you throw that away for some childhood infatuation. It's not an infatuation. Then what is it? Camille looked at her. Mother's furious face, at the cold certainty in her eyes, at the complete inability to see any perspective other than her own. Maybe it's just me growing up, Camille said quietly. She walked upstairs to her room, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the parlor. That night, Camille lay in bed thinking about Julian's face when he talked about the people who'd given him chances. About the pride in his voice when he spoke about his work. About the way he'd moved without hesitation when Leo was in danger. And she thought about her mother's words. About reputation and position and legacy. For the first time in her life, Camille wondered if those things were worth protecting. Or if maybe it was time to build something new. Tuesday morning brought clear skies and crisp autumn air. Camille woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She dressed in jeans and boots, tied her hair back in a ponytail, and headed downstairs early. Eleanor was already in the kitchen, reading the newspaper, over coffee and toast. She looked up when Camille entered, her expression cool and distant. Good morning, Mother. Camille, Eleanor's voice was clipped. I trust you've thought about our conversation last night. I have. And? Camille poured herself coffee, choosing her words carefully. I think we need to let Julian's crew do their work, without interference. Eleanor's mouth tightened. I see he's already gotten to you. Nobody's gotten to me. I'm making my own decisions. Are you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're repeating the same mistakes you made 10 years ago. The words stung, but Camille forced herself to stay calm. What happened 10 years ago was your mistake, not mine. Eleanor set down her coffee cup with a sharp click. My mistake was not making it clear enough to that boy that he wasn't welcome here. His name is Julian, and he's not a boy anymore. No, he's a man with an agenda, a man who knows exactly how to manipulate a lonely woman. I'm not lonely. Eleanor's smile was cruel. Aren't you? 27 years old, no husband, No children. Spending your days managing a crumbling house while your friends are building real lives. Each word was designed to wound. Camille recognized the tactic. Eleanor had always been skilled at finding weak spots and pressing them. Maybe I want something different than what my friends have. What you want and what's good for you are two different things. Before Camille could respond, the sound of truck engines filled the driveway. Julian's crew was arriving for another day of work. I should go, Camille said. Camille. Eleanor's voice stopped her at the kitchen door. Be very careful. Men like that don't forget slights. They wait. They plan. They come back when they think they have an advantage. Men like what? Men who think they're owed something. The words followed Camille outside like poison in the air. She tried to shake them off as she walked toward the work area, but doubt crept into her thoughts. What if her mother was right? What if Julian had come back for revenge instead of reconciliation? Julian was standing near the foundation excavation, consulting blueprints with Marcus. He looked up when Camille approached, his expression neutral. Morning, he said. How's Leo doing? I called the hospital this morning. He's sore, but healing well. Good. Julian turned back to his blueprints. We're starting on the garden drainage today. Should be quieter than yesterday. His professional distance felt like a wall between them. After their conversation at the diner, Camille had hoped for some warmth, some sign that their shared history still mattered. Julian, about last night. Last night was fine. Thank you for dinner. Julian's voice was carefully neutral. But we should keep things professional from here on out. The words hit Camille like a slap. Professional? It's cleaner that way. Less complicated. Marcus looked between them, sensing tension. I'm going to check on the drainage pipes, he said tactfully, walking away. Why? Camille asked when they were alone. What changed between last night and this morning? Julian folded his blueprints with careful precision. Nothing changed. That's the problem. I don't understand. Camille, we're from different worlds. We always have been. Last night was nice, but it doesn't change reality. What reality? Julian gestured toward the house, where Eleanor's silhouette was visible in the breakfast room window. That reality. Your mother's watching us right now. Judging. Planning how to get rid of me. Camille glanced back at the house. Eleanor was indeed watching them, her face hard with disapproval. I don't care what she thinks. Yes, you do. And you should. This is your life, Camille. Your family. Your world. I'm just passing through. The words stung because they carried truth. Camille had spent her whole life in this world. These people. These expectations. Could she really walk away from all of it? What if I don't want you to be just passing through? Julian looked at her for a long moment. Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or longing. Then his expression went carefully blank. Then you're not thinking clearly. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Camille standing alone in the garden. The morning passed slowly. Camille tried to focus on the state paperwork, but she kept watching Julian's crew through the windows. They worked with quiet efficiency, treating the property with respect and care. Julian moved among them like a conductor, managing an orchestra, adjusting plans and solving problems. Around noon, Camille made a decision. She prepared a tray of sandwiches and fresh coffee and carried it outside. Lunch, she announced to the crew. The workers looked surprised but grateful. They'd been eating from a cooler, basic sandwiches and bottled water. You didn't have to do this, Marcus said, accepting a cup of coffee. You're working hard. It's the least I can do. Julian hung back, clearly uncomfortable with the gesture. But Camille noticed he took a sandwich when he thought she wasn't looking. Miss Sterling, said Carlos, one of the older workers. This is really kind. Thank you. Call me Camille. The men exchanged glances. They weren't used to wealthy clients treating them like people instead of hired hands. Your house is beautiful, said Pete, the youngest worker after Leo. Must have amazing history. 4 generations of Sterlings, Camille said automatically. Then she paused. Though I'm not sure that's something to brag about. Julian looked up sharply at her tone. Why not? Pete asked innocently. Let's just say not all of those generations were particularly admirable. Camille, Julian said quietly, a warning. It's true. My great-great-grandfather built this place with money he made exploiting workers. Pay them nothing, charge them everything, keep them dependent. Camille surprised herself by speaking so honestly. Maybe it's time someone in the family acknowledged that. The crew fell silent. This wasn't the kind of conversation they expected from their employer. People change, Marcus said diplomatically. That was a different time. Was it? Or do we just tell ourselves that to feel better about the benefits we inherited? Julian set down his sandwich. We should get back to work. Why? Camille challenged. Because I'm making everyone uncomfortable by telling the truth? Because this isn't the time or place for this conversation. When is the time? When is it okay to admit that everything I was taught about being better than other people was just a lie to make us feel superior? The words tumbled out before Camille could stop them. She saw the shock on the workers' faces, the concern on Marcus's, the something that might have been pride on Julian's. Miss Sterling, Carlos said gently, every family has complicated history. What matters is what you do with it now. What if what I want to do is burn it all down? Then you better make sure you know what you're replacing it with, Julian said quietly. After the crew went back to work, Camille found herself walking through the house with new eyes. Every piece of furniture, every painting, every carefully preserved room represented decades of wealth built on the backs of people her family had considered lesser. She paused in the library, looking at her father's portrait above the fireplace. Charles Sterling had been a good man in many ways, kind to his family, generous with charity. But he'd also never questioned the system that gave him advantages. Neither had she, until now. Eleanor found her there an hour later. I heard you made quite a speech to the workers, her mother said, settling into her favorite chair. News travels fast. Mrs. Henley next door called. She was walking her dog and heard everything. Eleanor's voice was dangerously calm. Would you like to explain why you were airing our family's private business to strangers? They're not strangers. They're people working on our house. They're employees, Camille. There's a difference. Is there? Eleanor studied her daughter's face with growing concern. What's gotten into you? This isn't like you. Maybe this is exactly like me. Maybe I've just been pretending to be someone else my whole life. Someone else? Camille, you're a Sterling. That means something. What does it mean, really? Camille turned to face her mother fully. That we're better than other people? That we deserve respect we haven't earned? That we can treat people like they're disposable? Eleanor's face went pale. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Question the lies you've been feeding me since I was old enough to listen? Lies? Eleanor's voice rose. I've protected you, guided you, given you every advantage. You've controlled me, there's a difference. Eleanor stood up abruptly. I can see that man has already poisoned your mind against your own family. Julian hasn't poisoned anything. He's just reminded me that I used to have my own thoughts, my own values, before you convinced me that caring about other people was a weakness. Caring about the wrong people is weakness. And who decides who's wrong? You? Eleanor's composure finally cracked. Yes, me, because I understand how the world works. Because I know what happens to women who make foolish choices about men. What happens? They lose everything, their position, their security, their future. Eleanor's voice shook. They end up like my sister. Camille stared at her mother. Aunt Margaret? Eleanor's face went tight. She'd said more than she intended. What about Aunt Margaret? Nothing. Forget I mentioned her. Mother, what about Aunt Margaret? Eleanor was quiet for so long that Camille thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Margaret fell in love with the wrong man, someone beneath her station. I begged her not to throw her life away. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly. She married him anyway, cut ties with the family, lost everything. Where is she now? Dead. Eleanor's voice was flat. She died 5 years ago, alone, poor, forgotten. The words hung in the air between them. Camille felt pieces of her family's puzzle clicking into place. That's why you forged the letter to Julian. Eleanor's silence was answer enough. You were so terrified of me ending up like Margaret that you sabotaged my relationship. I saved you. You ruined my life. I gave you a better life. Camille laughed, but there was no humor in it. Better. Mother, I'm 27 years old and I've never made a real choice about anything that mattered. I've never stood up for something I believed in. I've never even figured out what I believe in because you've always told me what to think. Belief is a luxury, Camille. Security matters more. Does it? Because I feel pretty insecure right now. Eleanor moved closer, her voice becoming urgent. It's not too late. Send that man away. End this nonsense before it goes too far. And then what? Marry Sutton? Spend the rest of my life pretending to be someone I'm not? Sutton would give you stability, children, a place in society. Sutton's an ass. Eleanor flinched at the language. Camille! He's prejudiced and boring, and he talks to me like I'm a child who can't understand basic concepts. He's appropriate. Appropriate. Camille repeated the word like it tasted bitter. You know what? I'm tired of appropriate. I'm tired of suitable. I'm tired of living my life according to other people's rules about who's good enough. Those rules exist for a reason. Those rules exist to keep people like us feeling superior to people like Julian. But you know what? Julian's worth 10 of Sutton, and 10 of me, for that matter. He's using you, Camille. Can't you see that? The only person who's used me is you. Eleanor gasped like she'd been slapped. I am your mother. Everything I've done has been for your own good. No, everything you've done has been to keep me under your control. Camille felt years of resentment bubbling to the surface. You've made me afraid of my own feelings, afraid of taking risks, afraid of being anything other than what you wanted me to be. Without my guidance, you would have made terrible mistakes. Maybe, but they would have been my mistakes to make. Eleanor's face crumpled. For the first time, she looked old and fragile instead of imperious. I can't lose you too, she whispered. The words stopped Camille's anger cold. She saw her mother clearly for the first time, not as a controlling matriarch, but as a frightened woman who'd lost her sister and couldn't bear to lose her daughter. You're not going to lose me, Camille said gently. If you choose him, I will. Why? Because I can't watch you throw your life away. I can't stand by and watch you make Margaret's mistakes. Camille moved closer to her mother. What if they weren't mistakes? What if Margaret was happy, even if she was poor? She wasn't happy. She was miserable. She called me once, about 5 years after she married him, begging for money, for help, regretting everything. Did you help her? Eleanor's silence stretched too long. Mother, did you help her? I couldn't. Your father wouldn't allow it. He said if we helped her, it would validate her choices. So you let your sister suffer because helping her would have made you look bad. I'll let my sister face the consequences of her choices. Camille stared at her mother with new understanding. And you've spent the last 20 years terrified that I'd make the same choices she did. Wouldn't you be, if you had a daughter? The question caught Camille off guard. Would she be terrified of losing a daughter to love? Would she try to control her choices to keep her safe? Maybe, but she'd also want her daughter to be happy, to be herself, to make her own choices even if they were wrong. I'm not Margaret, Camille said finally. No, you're not. You're smarter, stronger. That's why you need to use that strength to walk away from this situation. What if using my strength means walking toward it instead? Eleanor's face hardened again. Then you're not as smart as I thought you were. That evening, Camille found Julian working alone in the garden. His crew had gone home, but he was still there, adjusting the grade on a drainage trench by hand. Long day, she observed. Julian looked up, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. I like to finish what I start. Can we talk? Julian straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. I'm pretty tired, Camille. This won't take long. He waited, his expression guarded. I owe you an apology, Camille said, for this morning, for being so formal, for making things complicated. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. I've been thinking. About what you said. About us being from different worlds. And you're right. Something flickered across Julian's face. Disappointment, maybe. But here's the thing, Camille continued. I don't like my world very much. I don't like the person it's made me. I don't like the way it treats people like you. Camille. Let me finish, please. She took a breath. I spent today thinking about my family, about the things I was taught, about the person I've become because of those teachings. And I realized something. What? I don't want to be that person anymore. Julian was very still. What does that mean? It means I want to try being myself for a change. The person I was before my mother convinced me that feelings were dangerous and different was bad. And who is that person? Camille smiled for the first time in days. I guess we'll find out together. Julian studied her face for a long moment. Your mother's not going to make this easy. I know. People are going to talk. Let them. You could lose everything. I already have everything. It just doesn't mean anything. Julian set down his tools and moved closer. Camille, I need to know you're sure about this, because I can't go through losing you again. The vulnerability in his voice broke her heart. I'm sure. Even if it means choosing between me and your family? Camille thought about her conversation with Eleanor, about Margaret, who died alone and forgotten, about a lifetime of letting other people make her choices. Maybe it's time I chose myself. Julian reached for her hand, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence when she didn't pull away. I missed you, he said quietly. For 10 years, I missed you. I missed you too, even when I thought I hated you. They stood in the gathering darkness, hands linked, surrounded by the evidence of Julian's work. The garden was still torn up, but Camille could see its potential, could imagine what it would become with the right care and attention, like her life, like her heart. So what happens now? Julian asked. Now we figure it out as we go. No plans? No strategy? Julian's mouth quirked. That doesn't sound like the Camille Sterling I remember. Maybe it's time for a new Camille Sterling. I like the old one just fine. Even the parts that hurt you? Julian considered the question seriously. Even those parts. They made you who you are. And who am I? Strong, brave, kind when you let yourself be. Julian's thumb traced across her knuckles. Worth waiting 10 years for. The words undid her completely. Camille felt tears she'd been holding back for days finally spill over. I'm sorry, she whispered. For the letter. For believing the lies. For not fighting harder. Hey. Julian cupped her face gently, wiping away tears with his thumbs. We were kids. We did the best we could with what we knew. What do we know now? Julian smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since he'd arrived. We know we get a second chance. How many people can say that? Not many. So we better not waste it. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, soft and sweet and full of promise. It wasn't the passionate reunion Camille had imagined, but it was better. It was real. Julian? Yeah? Thank you for coming back, for giving me the chance to get this right. Thank you for letting me. They stood together in the quiet garden, holding hands and watching the first stars appear overhead. Tomorrow would bring challenges, Eleanor's anger, society's judgment, the difficult work of building something new from the ruins of the past. But tonight, they had this moment, this choice, this second chance at love. Wednesday morning brought unexpected visitors. Camille was in the kitchen making coffee when 3 black cars pulled through the front gate. She recognized the lead vehicle immediately, Sutton's Mercedes, followed by 2 cars she didn't know. Eleanor appeared at Camille's shoulder, watching through the window with obvious satisfaction. "What's going on?" Camille asked. "I made some calls yesterday evening," Eleanor said smoothly. "After our conversation, I realized you needed to see the bigger picture." Camille's stomach dropped. "Mother, what did you do?" "What I should have done 10 years ago. I contacted some people who know about Julian Vance's real background." The front doorbell rang with authority. Eleanor smoothed her hair and walked toward the foyer with the bearing of a general preparing for battle. Sutton entered first, his usual smug smile wider than normal. Behind him came 2 men Camille didn't recognize. One wore an expensive suit and carried a briefcase. The other looked like security, broad shoulders, alert eyes, the kind of man wealthy families hired to handle problems. "Camille, darling," Sutton said, kissing her cheek with theatrical warmth. "I hear you've been having some trouble with your contractor." "I haven't been having any trouble." "Of course you haven't. You're too trusting to see it." Sutton gestured to the man in the suit. "This is Richard Hartwell from Hartwell Investigations. He's done some research on your Julian Vance situation." "It's not a situation." Hartwell opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Miss Sterling, I think you should see what we've discovered about your contractor's background." "I don't want to see anything." "Camille, don't be childish," Eleanor said sharply. "This affects our family's safety." Against her better judgment, Camille glanced at the folder Hartwell held open. She saw copies of news articles, police reports, financial documents. Her eye caught a headline: "Local teen arrested in vandalism case." 10 years ago, Hartwell said in a practiced voice. Mr. Vance was arrested for vandalizing property belonging to the Sterling family. Specifically, he spray-painted obscenities on the gate of this very estate. Camille stared at the police report. Julian's name was clearly visible, along with a mugshot of an 18-year-old boy who looked angry and heartbroken. "He was released with a warning," Hartwell continued. "But the incident shows a pattern of targeting your family." "A pattern?" Camille's voice was barely a whisper. "His return here, now, with his contracting business, appears to be calculated revenge. He's overcharging you significantly compared to his usual rates. Our analysis suggests he's planning to bankrupt you through cost overruns and delays." Sutton moved closer, his voice gentle and concerned. "Camille, we know this is hard to hear, but this man has been planning this for years. The timing isn't coincidental." Camille looked at the police report again. The date was 1 week after she'd supposedly sent the letter breaking up with Julian. He'd been arrested for spray painting "liars" and "fake" on the estate gate. "He was 18, she said weakly. "Age doesn't excuse criminal behavior," the security man said. It was the first time he'd spoken. "Vandalism, trespassing, destruction of property." Eleanor placed a maternal hand on Camille's shoulder. "Sweetheart, I know you want to see the good in people, but sometimes people aren't who they pretend to be." Through the window, Camille could see Julian's crew setting up for the day's work. Julian was directing them with his usual calm competence. He looked nothing like the angry boy in the police photo, but he had been that boy once. "There's more," Hartwell said, flipping through his folder. "Financial irregularities in some of his business dealings, complaints from former clients about overcharging, a pattern of targeting wealthy clients and exploiting their trust." "That's not true," Camille said, but doubt was creeping into her voice. "Darling," Sutton said gently, "I know you want to believe in him, but look at the evidence." Camille stared at the papers spread across her kitchen table. Police reports, financial records, client complaints. It painted a picture of Julian as calculating and vengeful. Someone who'd spent 10 years planning his return. But it didn't match the man who'd risked his life to save Leo, the man who spoke about his work with pride and passion, the man who'd held her hand in the garden and told her about second chances. "I need to talk to him," Camille said. "That's not advisable," the security man said quickly. "If he realizes we're investigating him, he might accelerate whatever he's planning." "What he's planning is fixing my house." "Is it?" Eleanor's voice was sharp. "Or is he planning to destroy everything our family has worked for?" Before Camille could respond, Julian's voice came from the kitchen doorway. "Am I interrupting something?" Everyone turned. Julian stood in the doorway, work boots and jeans, tool belt around his waist. He looked completely out of place among the expensive suits and careful grooming of Camille's visitors. His eyes went immediately to the papers spread across the table. Even from across the room, Camille could see him recognize the police report. "Mr. Vance," Sutton said with false warmth, "we were just discussing your work here." Julian's expression went carefully blank. "Were you?" "These gentlemen have some concerns about your business practices," Eleanor said with obvious satisfaction. Julian looked at Camille. "What kind of concerns?" Camille felt trapped between two worlds, the safe, familiar world of her upbringing, where people like Sutton and Hartwell protected people like her from people like Julian, and the uncertain world Julian represented, where she might be happy but could lose everything. "Julian," she said carefully, "they found some information about your past." "What kind of information?" Hartwell stepped forward. "The vandalism arrest 10 years ago, for starters." Julian's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "What about it?" "It shows a pattern of targeting the Sterling family." Julian looked directly at Eleanor. "Does it?" "You spray-painted our gate," Eleanor said triumphantly. "Criminal destruction of property." "I was 18, and heartbroken, and stupid." Julian's voice was calm, but Camille could see the tension in his shoulders. "Is there a point to this?" "The point," Sutton said, "is that your presence here seems designed to exploit Camille's past feelings for you." Exploit. The timing, the overcharging, the way you've manipulated her emotions. Sutton's voice grew harder. "We know what you're doing." Julian was quiet for so long that Camille wondered if he was going to defend himself at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired. "Camille, do you want me to leave?" The question hung in the air. Everyone was looking at her. Eleanor with expectation, Sutton with confidence, Hartwell with professional interest, the security man with readiness, and Julian with resignation. Camille looked at the police report again, at the boy's face, twisted with pain and anger. "I don't know." Something died in Julian's eyes. "Okay." "Julian, wait." "No, it's fine. I understand." Julian's voice was completely professional again. "I'll have my crew pack up. We'll be gone by this afternoon." "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" The question cut deep because it carried truth. Faced with the choice between Julian and her family's approval, Camille was hesitating. Just like she had 10 years ago. "I need time to think," she said weakly. Julian nodded once. "Take all the time you need." He turned and walked out, leaving Camille standing in her kitchen surrounded by people who thought they were protecting her. "You did the right thing," Eleanor said immediately. "I know it's hard, but—" "Get out." Eleanor blinked. "Excuse me?" "All of you, get out of my house." "Camille," Sutton started. "Now." The force of her voice surprised everyone, including herself. Sutton and his investigators gathered their papers and left without another word. Eleanor lingered, her face a mask of hurt disappointment. "I'm trying to save you from making a terrible mistake," she said quietly. "Maybe the terrible mistake was listening to you in the first place." Eleanor's face went pale. Without another word, she followed the others out. Camille stood alone in her kitchen, surrounded by the debris of her morning. Coffee growing cold, papers scattered on the table, the sound of Julian's crew packing up their equipment outside. She walked to the window and watched Julian directing his workers. His movements were efficient and professional, but she could see the tension in his body, the way he avoided looking toward the house. Marcus approached Julian with a question. Julian answered without looking up from the clipboard he was writing on. Even from a distance, Camille could see him signing papers, ending the contract, walking away from her again. An hour later, the trucks were loaded. The work area was cleared. Julian's crew climbed into their vehicles with the subdued air of soldiers retreating from battle. Julian was the last to leave. He stood for a moment, looking up at the house, his expression unreadable from Camille's window. Then he got in his SUV and drove away. Camille spent the rest of the day walking through the house like a ghost. Every room felt different now. The library where she'd fought with Eleanor. The kitchen where Sutton had ambushed her with his investigators. The foyer where she'd stood frozen while Julian left. By evening, she couldn't stand the silence anymore. She drove to the diner where she and Julian had eaten together. The same waitress was working, a middle-aged woman named Beth, who remembered Camille from the other night. "You look like you lost your best friend," Beth observed, refilling Camille's coffee cup. "Something like that." "Want to talk about it? I'm a good listener. Comes with the job." Camille found herself telling the whole story to a stranger. About Julian, about the letter, about the investigators in the police report, and the choice she couldn't make. Beth listened without judgment, occasionally refilling coffee or wiping down nearby tables. "So let me get this straight," Beth said when Camille finished. "You're upset because the man you love made mistakes when he was a teenager?" "It's not that simple. Isn't it? Honey, you think there's anyone in this town who doesn't know about Julian Vance, about what he did when he was 18? Camille looked up sharply. "You know about the arrest?" "Of course I know. Small town. People talk." Beth sat down across from Camille. "You know what else people talk about?" "What?" "How he came back 5 years ago and hired Tommy Peterson. Tommy was fresh out of rehab, couldn't get work anywhere. Julian gave him a job, taught him a trade. Tommy's got a family now. Good job, clean life." Beth continued. "And Maria Santos. Julian found out her husband was beating her, helped her get a lawyer, hired her as his bookkeeper so she could support her kids. Never told anyone about it. Maria had to tell me herself." "I didn't know that." "Course you didn't. Julian doesn't advertise his good deeds. But this town knows what kind of man he is." Beth leaned forward. "What we don't understand is why someone like you would let other people make decisions about your life. It's complicated." "No, it's not. It's scary. There's a difference." Beth stood up and grabbed the coffee pot. "Let me ask you something. That police report your fancy friend showed you. Did it mention what Julian spray painted on your gate?" "They said obscenities." Beth laughed. "Obscenities? Honey, Julian painted liars and tell her the truth on that gate. Real obscene, right?" Camille stared at her. "Tell her the truth?" "About what really happened. About the letter he never got from you. About the lies your mother told." Beth shook her head. "That boy knew he was being manipulated. He just couldn't prove it." "How do you know all this?" "Because Julian used to come in here after it happened, drunk, angry, heartbroken, talking about how none of it made sense, how the letter didn't sound like you." Beth's voice softened. "Took him 2 years to stop coming in here talking about you." Camille felt the last of her certainty crumble. "He never told me any of this." "Because he's proud, and because he figured if you believed your mother's lies once, you'd believe them again." Beth refilled Camille's cup one more time. "Question is, are you going to prove him right?" Camille drove home through the dark streets, Beth's words echoing in her head. When she reached the estate, she parked in the circular drive and sat looking up at the house. 4 generations of Sterlings had lived here. 4 generations of people who thought their money and breeding made them better than everyone else. People who built wealth on the backs of others and called it success. People like her. But maybe it didn't have to be that way. Maybe she could be different.
maybe it wasn't too late to choose love over legacy. Eleanor was waiting in the front parlor when Camille came inside. "How was dinner?" her mother asked without looking up from her book. "Enlightening." "Good. I hope you're beginning to see reason." Camille sat down across from Eleanor. "I am, just not the reason you think." Eleanor set down her book. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know what Julian spray painted on our gate 10 years ago." Eleanor went very still. What he painted doesn't matter. It was still vandalism. "Tell her the truth. That's what he painted." Camille's voice was steady. "He knew you'd lied to both of us. He was trying to get a message to me." "Camille." "And today, when Sutton brought his investigators, you knew exactly what they'd find. You probably hired them yourself." Eleanor's silence was answer enough. "You've spent 10 years terrified that Julian would come back, that I'd find out what you did. That's why you've been so desperate to get me married off to someone like Sutton." "I was protecting you." "No, you were protecting yourself, because you knew that if I ever found out the truth, I'd never forgive you." Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "Everything I did was for your own good. Everything you did was to keep me under your control. Without my guidance, without your interference, I might have been happy." The words hung between them like a blade. Eleanor looked older suddenly, fragile and frightened. "If you choose him, you'll lose everything," she whispered. "If I don't choose him, I'll lose myself." Camille stood up and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Eleanor called after her. "To try to undo the damage you've done." "Camille, if you walk out that door..." "You'll what? Disown me? Cut me off?" Camille turned back to face her mother. "Go ahead. I'm tired of living in a prison made of money." "You don't mean that." "I've never meant anything more in my life." Camille left Eleanor sitting, alone in the parlor, and drove through the night toward an uncertain future. Toward the possibility of love. Toward the chance to finally become the woman she was meant to be.